Every day of our lives, we experience the sensation of temperature. When it's hot outside, you immediately start sweating. When it's cold outside, we start shivering. When we touch a hot stove, we instantly jerk our hand away. When we hold an ice cube, we can only stand the numb feeling for so long. But how exactly do we sense temperature? Our bodies can do all these things due to a process called thermoception, which is the perception and sensation of temperature. How exactly does the process of sensing temperature work? As it turns out, our body has specialized nerve cells called free nerve endings that project into the outer layers of our skin that allow us to detect temperature. These nerve cells have different types of receptors that help us to detect hot and cold temperatures. The main receptor for hot temperatures is the TRPV1 receptor, and the main receptor for cold temperatures is the TRPM8 receptor. These receptors are embedded in these nerve cells and help you sense temperature. When you touch something hot, TRPV1 receptor channels open and cause the nerve cells that they are embedded in to fire. This sends signals to the brain that you are touching something hot. The same goes for TRPM8 receptors. When you touch something cold, TRPM8 channels open, which causes the nerve cells that they are embedded in to fire. This sends signals to your brain that you are touching something cold. Another interesting part about our perception of temperature is that it is influenced by relative temperature changes. More specifically, it means that the previous sensation of temperature affects our perception of the current sensation of temperature. Here's an experiment that you can try at home that shows this effect. Take 3 bowls of water and fill one with cold water, one with room temperature water, and one with hot water. Place one of your hands in the hot water and the other in the cold water for 1 minute. After 1 minute has passed, put both hands in the room temperature water. Even though both your hands are touching the same temperature water, the hand previously in the hot water will feel sensations of cold, while the hand previously in the cold water will feel sensations of warmth. When we think of perception of temperature, we usually think about touching something hot or cold. But can you think of any sensations that feel hot or cold even though the object isn't actually hot or cold? How about when you're eating something spicy, or when you eat something that has mint in it? Capsaicin is the molecule in peppers that makes them spicy. When you put capsaicin on your lips, you feel a burning hot sensation, but the pepper itself isn't actually hot. Why do you feel this? This is because capsaicin activates TRPV1 receptors, which, if you remember, send signals to the brain that something you are touching is hot. On the other hand, when you put something minty on your lips, you feel a very cool sensation. This is because minty substances have menthol in them, which is the molecule responsible for the cool sensation. Menthol activates TRPM8 receptors, which tells your brain that you are touching something cold, even though the mint isn't actually cold itself. As you can see, thermoception can be very complex, but our ability to perceive temperature is very important in our everyday lives.
How do you think you're able to feel the pressure when your friend pokes your arm to get your attention? Or how do you think your fingers can tell the difference in texture between your fuzzy dog or sandpaper? This is all because of a process called mechanoreception. Mechanoreception is our response to stimuli that is caused by a physical change, like coming into contact with objects. This allows us to detect touch, texture, and any kinds of changes in pressure. So, how many types of touch receptors do you think humans have? One? Many? Well, the answer to that question is that there are 4 main types of touch mechanoreceptors in our skin, and each of these 4 receptors have different receptive field sizes. Now, what exactly do I mean by a receptive field? Receptive fields describe the space around the neuron. If you stimulate the neuron in this space, it will create a signal to send to the brain. Receptive fields of our touch mechanoreceptors can either be small or big. Let's go ahead and start by looking at the 2 types of mechanoreceptors that have small receptive fields. The first type of mechanoreceptor that we will look at are called Merkel discs. These are found in the upper layers of the skin. They respond to things like light touch. Because these Merkel discs have really small receptive fields, this makes it easier for them to pinpoint the location of even the gentlest of stimuli. In addition, these types of receptors are sensitive to edges. They come in handy for tasks like typing on a keyboard. The The next type of mechanoreceptors are called Meissner's corpuscles, which are also found in the upper layers of the skin. They respond to light touch as well, but these ones are ideal for detecting different types of textures and patterns. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the two types of mechanoreceptors that have large receptive fields. This next type of mechanoreceptors are called Ruffini endings. They are found a little bit deeper in the skin and they have larger receptive fields. These tell us when our skin is being stretched or if it's experiencing deeper, longer pressure. They are useful for helping us to grip objects and control the positions of our fingers. For example, if you're holding a mug and it slowly begins to slip from your fingers, your Ruffini endings are going to detect this and send that information to your brain. This is going to prevent you from dropping the mug. The last type of touch mechanoreceptor we will look at are called Pacinian corpuscles. These are found deeper in the skin as well and have larger receptive fields. They are useful for detecting sudden changes in vibration or pressure. For example, if you're walking on carpet and the floor suddenly changes to hard wood, your Pacinian corpuscles will help you to detect this change. In addition to these four types of touch mechanoreceptors, we also have a special type of mechanoreceptor in our hair follicles. This type of receptor is called a hair root plexus, and they are able to tell when our hair is being moved. The process by which these mechanoreceptors send information to the brain is called mechanotransduction. All of these mechanoreceptors are going to work together to detect any changes in your skin's pressure. This is going to cause the neuron to generate a signal that is then going to be sent up to the brain. The electrical signals will travel up through the spinal cord until they reach an area of the brain called the somatosensory cortex. The somatosensory cortex is very special in that it contains a map of the body. So, if you feel something on your right hand, the signal will be sent to the region of this cortex responsible for your right hand. From the somatosensory cortex, these signals are sent to other areas of the brain. For example, it can be sent to motor areas that make us perform certain actions, or they can be sent to other areas of the brain to help us make decisions. Let's go through an example to help us tie this all together. Say you're standing in a room and there's a fly that keeps flying around, and suddenly it lands on your arm. The pressure of the fly on your arm will stimulate the touch mechanoreceptors in that area of your arm. These mechanoreceptors will then send a message to your brain that tells you that something has landed on that very spot on your arm. The brain will then send this information to other areas of the brain. For example, it might send information that tells your eyes to go ahead and look down at that part of your arm. Or it might send information that tells your other hand to swat the fly away.
Sensing pain is important to our survival because it lets us know when we need to take extra care of our bodies to prevent further injuries. But how do we feel pain? There are special nerve cell endings that initiate the sensation of pain. These cells are called nociceptors. Let's say that you accidentally step on a Lego. Cells that are a part of our immune system release chemicals that stimulate our nociceptors. The nociceptors then project the signal to the spinal cord and release pain neurotransmitters, which stimulate neurons in the spinal cord. The neurons in the spinal cord then send the signal to the brain. The brain then sends a signal to the area of injury, in this case, your foot. This is how you feel the excruciating pain of stepping on a Lego. There are some interesting and terrifying conditions related to pain. Hyperalgesia is a decreased sensitivity to pain. This may sound nice, but hyperalgesia actually can be very dangerous, as people with this condition would not know what hurts, and therefore would not know to stop doing an action that is injuring their body. For example, a child may leave their hand on a hot stove without even realizing that the stove is on. The opposite of hypoalgesia is hyperalgesia. This is caused by damage to nociceptors or peripheral nerves. This is an increased sensitivity to pain stimuli. Allodynia is a pain resulting from a stimulus that does not normally provoke pain. For example, a bad sunburn can cause temporary allodynia because touching sunburned skin or running cold or warm water over sunburned skin can be very painful. It is different from hyperalgesia, as hyperalgesia is an exaggerated reaction to a stimulus which is normally painful. Lastly, paresthesia is a sensation of tingling, tickling, prickling, or burning of a person's skin, with no apparent physical cause. The most familiar kind of paresthesia is a sensation known as pins and needles, also known as a limb falling asleep.
Grab a glass of water, close your eyes, and take a sip. When we take a sip from our drink, we don't have to actually look at the cup as it goes to our mouth, do we? I bet that you moved it there with your eyes closed. So how did you know how to do that without watching it in order to bring it to your mouth? Well, in everyday life, we depend on signals coming from our own moving bodies in order to be able to both interact with and respond to the world around us. This is called our hidden sixth sense, and it's called proprioception. Proprioception is essentially our connection from our body to the world around us. It is the body's uncanny ability to locate our limbs even in complete darkness. And we get this knowledge from sensations arising in specialized cell receptors called proprioceptors. First, let's talk a little bit more about why we need proprioception using our water glass example. Our proprioceptive system helps us to know where our limbs are. We were able to move the water glass to our mouth with our eyes closed because our proprioceptors send the information about where our hand, and therefore the cup, is through to the brain for us so that we can actually take that sip. Second, it helps us to grade our force and speed of movement. Our proprioceptive sense makes certain that our hand moves our water glass slowly and smoothly to reach our mouth without spilling the water everywhere or crashing it aggressively into our face. It helps us to maintain our muscle tone. If you rest your arm versus reach out and grab that glass of water, how does your muscle stretch, and how does it change in tone in response to your movement? And finally, it helps us to maintain our balance. For example, if you were standing on one foot, we might feel our ankle moving slightly to keep us from completely toppling over. That's due to our proprioceptors. So our proprioceptors are sensory receptors that respond to internal stimuli, working to convey the perception of location of all of our limbs. Essentially, they control your sense of self. We're going to talk about the muscle spindle and the Golgi tendon organ. These are a few of the proprioceptors that respond to push, pull, heavy muscle work, and stretch. The first type we're going to talk about is the muscle spindle. Imagine here that we're looking at this first muscle from a zoomed out point of view. As we zoom in here on the right, we find very small receptors in the shape of an elongated capsule. These are muscle spindles, and they contribute the most to our perception of position. Specifically, they report muscle length. Imagine that we are about to throw a baseball. We pick it up and we move the arm backward in space, winding up for the throw. As we move the arm back, the muscle fibers sense a stretch of the muscle, and as a result, it will facilitate muscle movement, changing shape and causing muscle activation. In this scenario, it will contract in order to grasp the ball and to throw it forward. By sending signals to the brain in this manner, we are able to tell exactly how relaxed or contracted every single muscle is in our body. Essentially, it allows us to know exactly where our arm is in space. A second type we're going to talk about is the Golgi tendon organ. As you might be able to tell, these are in the tendon rather than the muscle. The tendon is an area located on either side of the muscle fibers, acting to connect the muscle to the bone and facilitating its movement in this way. The Golgi tendon is involved in sensing tendon stretch. So say you're lifting something heavy. Since the muscle is acting very arduously, the tendon will stretch. And the Golgi tendon organ is designed to protect the muscles and tendons from damage, and so they're sensitive to this tension during contraction. So basically, the Golgi tendon organ is sensitive to how heavy that weight is that you're lifting. They cause muscle inhibition because they work to protect you from damage by putting less force or stretch through the tendon. So how do these signals get to the brain? Well, from proprioceptors like muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs, there are a few different types of neurons on the pathway to the brain. The first are first-order neurons. These convey pain, temperature, and any form of light touch from your peripheral limbs and take it to the central nervous system, such as the brain and spine. The signal travels up the spinal cord, where some of them synapse with second-order neurons, either in the spinal cord or in the brainstem. These secondary neurons connect the spinal cord and brainstem to brain structures that are the first ones involved in sensory perception, like the thalamus. Once they get to the brain, these are where the third-order neurons come in. These neurons begin in the thalamus and they travel out to the cerebral cortex, or other parts of the brain like the somatosensory cortex that are associated with conscious perception of sensation. Alright, so why is this all important? Well, let's go back to the water glass that we started out with. If you didn't have properly functioning proprioceptors, you might use too much force and break the glass accidentally. Or you may use too little pressure and drop the glass. You might become tired easily, or you might completely miss your mouth and spill the water everywhere. This is why your proprioceptive system is so important. It lets the brain know where our body is in space and the force and speed of your limb movement. Anytime we move our spine, feet, neck, hands, arms, and legs, even when we are completely still, the stretch of the muscles, or lack of stretch, tells the brain where we are and helps us to maintain our balance. And when we go to do tasks, proprioceptors are what allows our limbs to move into the correct position with the correct speed and with the correct force required for all activities.